You're listening to All Things Astrology, a conversation with Isha Lerner and Mark Lerner. This conversation is sponsored by 4Fame Smash, a new music compression, storage, and text messaging app. Check it out and download it free at 4famesmash.com.
Hi, this is Isha for part 2 of the conversation with Mark Lerner. We plan to do one of these a week because we want to track the momentous days ahead. And in this segment, we'll be discussing the USA Inauguration Chart as it relates to the United States, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So we left part 1 with an explanation of the 3 Saturn-Uranus squares that'll be exact in 2021. And we also talked about the auspicious new moon that will occur before the inauguration and the glorious full moon soon after. So in a keynote, before we get going with Mark Lerner, I just wanted to mention that our superpower of 2021 lies within a willingness to illumine courage and break open. Uranus in Taurus strikes lightning to that which needs to change, and we bring about unknown factors that force us to trust the great leap into the new. Saturn in Aquarius will bring invention and a grounded genius that could offer realistic solutions to the world, climate change, environmental concerns, and the Aquarius sign brings about science as a big leader and helps us take a good look at nurture versus nature. So it's going to be quite a time. Also, the space age will open our imagination, and in so many ways, the unknown sky is the limit. Anyway, so welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
Let's get down to the brass tacks of this segment. You've got all the charts in front of you, and I'm so curious, what does the inauguration chart tell us?
I think we mentioned before, the one thing we definitely need to continue to mention is the traditional nature going back hundreds of years at any rate, maybe 2,000 years, about the concept of the void moon. So even though not everybody uses it, it is a significant factor. And this is one of every so often at inauguration, there will be a void moon, which the fundamental meaning is that the moon has made its major alignments, what we call conjunctions, oppositions, squares, trines, sextiles, and it doesn't make any more of those until it leaves the sign. And for a number of minutes or hours, sometimes even longer, the moon is said to be void. It is not necessarily bad, but it is definitely an influence. And just so that everyone knows, before we get into the heart and soul of the chart and the connection with Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, the last frequent void moons were the 4th inauguration of Franklin Roosevelt in 1944. And then the next one was JFK, 1961. The second inauguration of Richard Nixon, 1973. Then Bill Clinton's second inauguration, 1997. And even the first inauguration of Barack Obama. So now we've got another one. The next 4 years from now will not be a void. 4 years after that won't be a void. After that, I'll do more research. So we've got a void moon, just so that everyone knows that's a factor.
I have a question, Mark. Do you think that the Barack Obama void moon kind of broke the spell of the sort of the curse that a void moon during inauguration means that the president may not finish out his term?
Well, what happened, and it's curious because we've had different things, and this also goes back to what we talked the last time, Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions and Earth signs, which started in 1842 and then 1861, 1881. And presidents, unfortunately, were going through, we were losing presidents like Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, and so on. And there became confusion in kind of the astrology field and what was called Tecumseh's curse and other kinds of things about presidents dying in office as if it was a curse, when it was really connected to somehow Jupiter-Saturn cycles and some kind of bizarre negativity. However, the void moon is not necessarily that the president must either die in office or get sick. As you said, what happened with President Obama was that the moon was in the very last degree of Scorpio. People may remember the next day, because there was a little bit of confusion in taking the oath with John Roberts, I think one of his middle name was said first or whatever, they actually redid the oath privately the next day just to make sure sort of constitutionally they didn't have to do that. But what we did see, Isha, was that the current president has tried to overturn almost everything that President Obama did in 8 years. And that's the sort of function of the void. President Barack Obama is good, helped Joe Biden, Kamala Harris to win this election. And he's still going strong. But the policies have been overturned, many of them.
Right. So it also seems very interesting that the moon was at the end of its last degree of the zodiacal sign at the void moon for the first inauguration of Barack Obama.
Right.
And now is at the last zodiacal degree of a sign for this inauguration with Joe Biden.
Right. And the good thing about all this, I think we might have mentioned last time, but you and I privately have shared before a little bit, that it turns out that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, they have a kind of, I've never used this word with astrology, an exquisite series of alignments in their charts. For instance, their Jupiters are 60 degrees apart, from Cancer to Taurus, as an example. Their Pallas Athenas, I know we're going to talk about that. Pallas Athena is 60 degrees apart in their charts. Joe Biden has an Aquarian Pallas Athena, and Pallas has just entered there. And at the inauguration, Pallas will have just come back in Joe Biden's chart as he's taking the oath. Plus,
well, that's incredible because,
right.
Yeah, Pallas Athena just moved into Aquarius, as we know, which is monumental and really does lead the way into this Aquarian era that we're about to embark upon.
It's been the key extra planet with Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto in Capricorn this whole year. Pallas actually, like Saturn earlier in the year, in the spring, moved into 1 degree of Aquarius, then backtracked for several months until just yesterday, I guess it was. So again, looking at the charts, to have Pallas Athena come back about 24 to 48 hours, maybe 72 hours, as the president-elect is preparing to take the oath, he'll have, for the first time in 4 years, that's about the cycle of asteroids, they come back every 4 years. But guess what? He's not only going to have Pallas Athena back, but he's in the process of having his Ceres, the largest asteroid, now often considered a dwarf planet. His Ceres is coming back as well. And he also has Vesta conjunct Pallas Athena. They're in his chart, within 1 degree of each other. So as Pallas swings over its own position, it's also on Vesta, which has a lot to do with soul sister connections, the eternal flame of the ancient world, and so many other very powerful themes.
Well, and of course, Pallas Athena is the goddess warrioress born out of Zeus's head. And I think it's actually really interesting and perhaps a bit of a clue that you may have studied, and I didn't really look at it, might have been one of the support systems from the cosmos that Joe Biden had and does have. Pallas in Aquarius. Pallas would be moving into Aquarius to bring about this new Aquarian energy of Saturn and Jupiter, and that would be conjunct his natal chart during the time of the inauguration. So I find that pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and all these people he's lining up to be in these positions, like today, as an example, December 8th, as we're doing this recording, he will be nominating a former senator or governor from Vilsack, who was already, this is just agricultural secretary, but he already did that in the Obama-Biden administration for Governor Vilsack. He's bringing people into all kinds of amazing positions, so a kind of rainbow bridge of nationalities, of ethnic groups, and so on, to really give the flavor of everything. And the other thing about that moon cycle, about being at the end of Aries, Kamala Harris will have already had her monthly moon return that morning, and right after the inauguration, within about 2 or 3 hours after he takes the oath, Joe Biden will have his lunar return. They have their moons basically conjunct within about 5 or 6 degrees. So they're both getting their lunar energy is reinforced on the day of the inauguration.
Right. And I think that empowers the warrioress queen of Pallas Athena.
I mean, the whole thing is amazing. I don't want to leave out Juno because they have, this is the other extraordinary thing. They both have Juno at the same place in the zodiac, which turns out to be around 8 to 9 degrees of Sagittarius, which for the chart that is basically used over the years from Welcome to Planet Earth, the astrology magazine that you and I have been a part of, and so many of the fellow astrologers we've had over the years, the rising sign we've used for decades for America is 8 degrees Sagittarius. So they're bringing in Juno, which is peace and harmony when it's working well. When it's negative, as it's often been the last several years, we get disharmony, we get disempowerment in relationships. And they are here, not only do they have the same Juno, but they're both going to have 3 Juno returns as we get into 2021. So Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, they're tuned in with their moons are in sync. They've got their Jupiters aligned with one another. There are so many different things that are going on in their charts that it's as if they had to be running.
Let's make it clear to our audience, to our listeners, that Juno represents partnership. You know, I think we don't want to assume that everyone knows what
Right.
Juno and Vesta and Pallas are about. So if we can give a little explanation.
Right. Yeah, Juno, it's kind of like, in many ways, another Venus. I mean, if we had to take the 4 main asteroids, Ceres, Pallas, Athena, Juno, and Vesta, out of those 4, the one that's most akin to Venus. In fact, a lot of asteroid astrologers associate both Pallas, Athena, and Juno with Libra as kind of extra co-rulers with Venus of that particular sign.
Mm-hmm. So again, the feminine. So let's get down to the brass tacks of the inauguration chart. What would you say are the key points that we should be aware of, that we can focus on and basically hold in the light?
Well, the highest thing, if you look in any of the chart presentations, you'll see an extraordinary kind of situation, because not only is the sun at the very beginning of Aquarius, but for the first time, and I haven't even done this research, we have the sun with Jupiter and Saturn. They're all within 7 degrees in the elevated position of the chart, plus Pallas, Athena, and Mercury. So there's 5 celestial bodies in Aquarius directly above. So in a way, I think we can say whatever voidness is part of this particular chart, which is something that we will keep monitoring and looking at to see how it pops up. Nevertheless, there's this substantial energy in the elevated position, and we don't want to forget Venus and Pluto are in Capricorn, the sign before Aquarius. Ceres and Neptune are exactly at the same degree, which is another whole thing, that's in Pisces. And I guess we'll talk for a moment too about the extraordinary nature that Mars and Uranus, you're going to give the degree, are together at 7 of Taurus. And that's an extraordinary conjunction in and of itself.
Yeah, well, I think also I wanted to ask you about that, because in looking at the inauguration chart, we know that there's an exaltation of the Aquarian planets at the top of the chart, which indicates, of course, outer work and purpose. And in the inauguration, I would imagine, as you know, the date is always the same. There's always the 0+ degree Aquarius sun. Now, it just so happens that this year there's many Aquarian planets that are up there. So I think it's exalting that energy of science and new inventions, innovation, change, and awakening. So the ruler of all of that Aquarius is conjunct Mars. Of course, Mars being the warrior king in all of us, the will force, the masculine, and they happen to reside in the 12th house, the hidden house of the unconscious, where it isn't as reachable, or it lives in the unconscious. What do you think that's about? I think it's intriguing that they're in the 12th house. Could that mean that there's going to be suppressed rebellion and that it will take time for it to come out, or how would you call it?
Well, again, I shared, and I think we talked about it briefly, but the chart for Abraham Lincoln's second inauguration, while the Civil War was still going on for another month, Uranus was near the ascendant and the moon was approaching Mars. And we've got the same kind of thing in the 12th house. The moon at this inauguration inauguration is approaching Mars. And we also have the same setup from 1864. That was on March 4th, the older date when presidents were inaugurated. But this January 20th, 2021, when the moon leaves voidness at the end of Aries, goes into the beginning of Taurus, we get a first quarter moon phase, the same phase that existed in 1864. Lincoln gave an amazing speech. The Civil War went on for another month and a few days until Appomattox. And then we know the whole thing of John Wilkes Booth, the Ford's Theater, which happened April 14th, and how that changed America forever. So the thing is, there are patterns that are kind of similar, but Abraham Lincoln gave an incredible speech and the country was divided. And now we have the same kind of thing. Luckily, we're not involved in an actual physically fighting civil war. But as we all know, politically and socially, what's been developing is kind of this concern in this country of the split in culture and society. And we're needing a kind of assertive new presidency, executive branch, as you've been saying, with all that Aquarius, the moon going into Taurus, the first feminine sign of the zodiac, to sort of cut through these crises, which is part of what a first quarter moon is all about. How do we sort of cut through crises and do some very powerful work? And that's what Joe Biden has been talking about the last couple of weeks of what we're going to have to do, whether it has to do with health, whether it has to do with bringing everybody together. It may take a while, but at least the inaugural chart does show the potential for that unity that could eventually happen.
Well, it does seem, excuse me, interesting, as I mentioned, to have the Mars-Uranus conjunction in the 12th house being the Piscean house, so has to do with ancestral water. So here's what's very interesting. The degree at 7 degrees of Taurus for that Uranus-Mars conjunction, which again, as you are saying, has a lot to do with rebellion and a kind of outcry in a way for awakening unusual disturbances, perhaps. It could be violence. We don't know. But it's there in the 12th house. Again, the house of the unconscious. That is the house of the unconscious of the inauguration chart. So the degree at 7 degrees of Taurus, remember that's a Pisces water house. Here it is. It's amazing. The woman of Samaria at the ancestral well. The keynote, the meeting of the traditional past and of the creative spirit pointing to the future. There's a keynote here in this writing by Dane Rudyard that says, the creative future descends first to that which has become chaos. An old order is never open to a new revelation until it has accepted disorder in the name of that power which subsumes all forms of order, i.e., love. In the second stage, it says here, of a five-fold sequence, a contrasting element enters the scene. It is no longer a collective cultural effort based on past knowledge, but is a meeting that introduces into the collective situation a totally new factor which transcends it. Big letters in bold, a new quality of being is revealed, which renders the old patterns obsolete.
Well, that's very extraordinary. And I think we shared last time, Isha, that after the moon goes into Taurus, after being void, it will make the conjunction to the Mars and the Uranus positions in the next 24 hours. And then it will actually go out of the 12th house as it goes into the middle of Taurus and go into the first house of higher self-expression after that first 24-hour time period.
And I also, yeah, that's right. And I think it's also really interesting that in Donald Trump's chart, he has Mars very strong in his chart, Mars on the ascendant in Leo. And so in a way, I mean, I don't want to archetypically place the whole essence of a cultural phenomenon just on the archetype of his chart as it relates to a collective shift. However, he's played a huge role as this Mars warrior king that in a way has created the divisiveness, whether you're for him or not. My point here is not to say he's horrible or he's good. But I do want to point out that he carried the Mars energy about as far as it could go to create an almost civil war in our country. And so here we are now with, in the collective inauguration chart, in the subconscious, this sense of rebellion and violence is held. And the Sabian symbol that was just read speaks about the powerful need for the future to unfold a greater truth. And of course, rendering patterns obsolete, the ones that have been stubbornly held onto, which is Uranus Taurus, and then of course, the Saturn Aquarius, which again is fundamentally scientific in so many ways, space age, moving into new dimensions of consciousness as well. So that seems interesting for the inauguration chart, in a sense, for the administration that is coming. And that being said, is there anything that you would like to share with us about Kamala Harris and her chart connected to the inauguration chart, or Joe Biden, which we did with that Pallas and Athena, I think, in Aquarius is phenomenal, showing how he is, in a way, ushering in the warrioress queen. It's pretty beautiful, really. So where's Kamala sit in this chart?
Well, there's so many things, and I know we'll talk more about her. We know her exact birth time. We know that she's moving over the next couple of years into what we call a major career cycle, because not only her age arc, where she's born 1964, so you see she's heading for a second Saturn return next couple of years at the top of her chart.
Yeah.
And her Saturn is conjunct the United States moon and Pallas in Aquarius. But what we do have is amazing too, that Venus in Capricorn in the inaugural chart is up in the 9th house. It's in the middle of Capricorn. And two things here that are extraordinary. It's trine, the Venus position is trine the ascendant of the inauguration chart very closely, within less than 1 degree, showing the prominence of Venusian energy, of course, traditional and kind of universal feminine. Secondly, that Venus, as well as Vesta, the asteroid Vesta, will stop the day before the inauguration at 21 of Virgo. And if you look closely at Kamala Harris's chart, in the 4th house of home, roots, and foundations, you got a triple conjunction of Uranus, Pluto, and Venus. So what's going to happen is the asteroid Vesta, between now, in fact, it's happening literally now, Vesta is right on her Pluto, will then move over her Venus, will go past there, then start coming back after she becomes vice president. And Venus will be trying that whole area, as well as the inaugural chart. It's kind of like they're all interlocking. And beyond the Mars and Uranus, we've got all this Venus. One other thing about Joe Biden, which you and I talked to before, which is extraordinary, and you just mentioned Donald Trump's Mars, which is rising in his chart. His sun in Gemini is on the United States Mars, and we've been having this overdose of Mars, unfortunately, for the country. Joe Biden is born with Mars in Scorpio, along with the sun and Venus in his own 12th house. And when the election happened, the sun was exactly on his Mars. So in a way, he out-Marsed the president. And Mars traditionally has ruled both Aries and Scorpio. And we didn't know if he was going to win that or not. And turned out that the solar illumination of his own Mars in the 12th house was a very positive factor, giving him the election.
Wow, it's almost as if the Mars in the 12th house, which had been lying somewhat latent or perhaps, needed to come out, was ignited.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
So what's happening is that everywhere you look, where if you took the inauguration chart by itself and you start, as I do with mundane astrology, you see various things of, oh no, I hope it doesn't go in this direction. You'll compare it to other voids of the past, and it'll be, in a sense, a cause for worry or stress. On the other hand, the connection between these two people who are going to take power, they have such an extraordinary compatibility or synastry or synchronicity that is way beyond what a normal president, vice president. I haven't researched all the Joe Biden and Barack Obama connections, but it's very extraordinary. First of all, again, the first woman in a position of power, vice president or president for the country. That's going to be an extraordinary thing for women in this country and for men and women all over the world. And so that's going to be exciting. And we just see all of these alignments that, in a sense, go above and beyond what the challenges might be in the inaugural chart.
And also, something that sounds exciting and brings me a lot of joy in my heart is to think of President-elect Joe Biden and Jill Biden in the White House, to have a married couple in the White House that is in love, that cares about one another, that there's a family in there, that we can exalt, in a sense, the archetype of Juno, as you mentioned, partnership. And in a way, it can exude that partnership and that energy of right relation, hopefully out into the world. And again, looking at these charts, I think, as you and I both agree, the purpose is to bring forward goodwill and the high hopes, for the very best outcome for all, and to also be aware of what we can bring into a conscious light, envelop it in light and love, and see to it that we remain focused and clear in our own life, that we may bring these changes about.
I'm very excited, and we've got a couple of weeks to go. As you said earlier, we'll be sharing more with everybody as we go along here, because we've got a total solar eclipse coming up in 6 days. We've got other things that will relate to the government. On January 6th is when there's a joint session of Congress that validates the electoral votes that will be tabulated this coming Monday. So I know when we come back together to do another one, that will be in our rear view mirror, the total solar eclipse, which is another big, powerful thing. But ahead of us will be the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction on the winter solstice, December 21. So we've covered a lot here in these two sessions, and it's pretty exciting to move forward.
It is. Thank you so much for doing this, and I look forward to our next segment.
Lots of love and blessings to you, to everybody out there. I'll look forward to the next one as well.
Thank you, Mark.
That's it for now. Join us for the next All Things Astrology with Isha Lerner and Mark Lerner. We'll see you next time.